Hello, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Power of Our Story. We are a place of safety and connection for those who protect us. And we build community by sharing stories in a healing and protective, judgment free zone. So today we welcome John A. Dailey. He was born and raised in Loudon County, Virginia. He joined the Marines at 17, leading to a career of over 20 years. Most of that time was spent working in special operations with tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. He received his MFA in creative writing from UNCW in 2018. He shares his views on life in a weekly substack, Think, Read, Write, Repeat, and his thoughts on developing mental toughness through physical fitness at rtfusubstack.com, which will be in the description on the YouTube channel. He shares an empty nest in Hubert, North Carolina, with his wife, Tracy, and their dachshund, Max. He's also the author of Tough, Rugged Bastards. Tough, Rugged Bastards is the memoir of an ordinary guy who seized an extraordinary opportunity to become one of the most elite warfighters in America during the most volatile times in the global war on terror. And again, that link will also be in the description. So, John, I'm so thrilled to have you here. Welcome. And I'm going to hand it over to you, and then we'll have a coffee conversation after you share your story. So, welcome.
Excellent. Thank you. Like I mentioned earlier, I'm thrilled to be here. A friend and another writer, Dan Sheehan, I saw that he was on and was like, man, I really enjoyed, that. So he made the connection and here we are. So my bio kind of talks about, how I grew up. I grew up, um, as Scott, currently lives in Loudon County, right? You said, or is that Rich? I'm sorry. Yeah, Rich. Loudon County's grown up quite a bit since I was there. Kind of born and raised in Hillsboro, which is a little tiny town, or at least it was the last time I was there, on the kind of in between the Virginia West Virginia border. And then I wound up. My family moved across the border into West Virginia when I went into high school. And it was, in a lot of ways, a really idyllic life, plenty of woods and mountains to run around in. But, as I got into high school, I just knew that I needed to get as far away from it as quickly as I could. So I had enlisted in the Marine Corps at 17. My parents signed, they saw the writing on the wall. That was all I talked about. That was all that I wanted to do. And, I was really fortunate. I think anybody that's been in the military will, it's kind of easy to fall in, with the wrong crowd in the military, or I'm sure in any sort of endeavor. Right. And I had some great, mentors early on that kind of, steered me in the right path. But I was, you know, just always kind of in awe of the fact that I was a U.S. Marine, that I made it through boot camp. And I think it's a feeling shared by anybody that's worn the Eagle Lobe and Anchor. It's still, it's an honor to have had the opportunity to serve in the Marine Corps. But after I got in, I started realizing that there were, I started out as an infantryman, and every unit that I went to, I'd kind of look and say, hey, what's next? What's the next opportunity? And the first really a real opportunity that presented itself was to become a scout sniper, which is a challenge in the Marine Corps. So I made my way into that, and that of course leads to taking the selection for at what at the time was the Marine Corps' only special operations unit for force reconnaissance. Um, so I got there as a relatively young Marine, and our mission there was to kind of serve as the eyes and ears of the forward commander. So this was the time between the wars, right? Between the obviously post Vietnam, but before and then shortly after Desert Storm, and you know it it's interesting when I look back at it now. we spent a lot of time doing a lot of dangerous things uh, but at the time, the idea of, any sort of mental implications of anything that we did was glossed over, right? It was not something that anybody would talk about. Um, and I worked kind of in that line of work for most of my career. A lot of uh, just a lot of incredible experiences, and a lot of terrible experiences as well. I think that's one of the things that I always say about the Marine Corps, and I think people say about the military is the some of your best times are times that others would say are best forgotten, right? The times that I've always really believed, and I talk about it a lot in the book. There's a guy, Paul Dubois, who was a philosopher, who had a quote that said, he who suffers well suffers less. Right? You kind of build suffering or build mental toughness through challenge. And now it's a little more recent than Scott and I's time, but the Marine Corps' culminating event when you go through boot camp is just like called the Crucible, right? It's kind of the place where you throw metal to melt it and get rid of the impurities. Um, and I feel like the Marine Corps does that well. It does that well in boot camp, and that offers challenges where you can find ways to improve yourself and further harden yourself. But what I didn't realize until much later is at the same time when the and I talk about this in the book, this kind of realization that the biggest compliment that we could give to one another was to say that, hey, that guy is really hard. That it just meant they're mentally tough. It was, I call it like the recon good housekeeping seal of approval. All right. But what I realized later is that in order to achieve that hardness, you kind of had to chip away at a lot of, things, until you were kind of down to the essence of what it meant to be a Marine and to be a good, reconnaissance Marine, a special operations Marine. And in doing so, you get rid of a lot of humanity, right? You get rid of, a lot of things get left on the floor. Um, and it took me, I think I'm still kind of realizing some of the effects of that, but it's nothing that can't be recovered, but you have to understand that you've lost a lot along the way, if that makes sense. So kind of back to my story, or a little side detour, I guess. So little history lesson. So in the military, it wasn't until the hostages in Iran were taken in the late 70s, early 80s, that there was the recognition after the failed hostage rescue attempt called Desert Claw, um, that the military needed an organization that housed all of its special operations. Prior to that, the Navy had the SEALs, the Army had the Green Berets, the Special Forces, the Marine Corps had Force Recon, and the Air Force had their special operations personnel, but they all operated independently. So finally, after that debacle, the government said, "Hey, we're going to form a United States Special Operations Command," and that uh, stood up in 1987. And when it did, the Marine Corps opted out of it. The Marine Corps is like, no, no, we're good. We don't want to participate. So the SEALs went over, the Green Berets went over, the Rangers went over, the Army Special Operations Aircraft Regiment went over, and of course the pararescue and the combat control folks from the Air Force went over, but the Marines did not. So we were kind of considered at that point the kind of the little sisters in the special operations community. Um, and we kind of lamented that fact. We didn't get as much money or as much cool stuff as the other guys did. But the thing that I think we always recognized and relied on was that, hey, we, as all Marines do, we do more with less, and we're willing to work harder than anybody else. And so it was a great way to grow up, in my opinion. Maybe not always at the time, but it was kind of like having a very strict father and mother. You kind of knew you had to do what was necessary to accomplish the things that you set out to accomplish, is like the missions that you were given. So all of this changed in a night when I was sitting at a table in Darwin, Australia, throwing back beer. Um, and the soccer game on the television above the bar switched to the towers. And, it was like 9 p.m. in Darwin. And, as soon as we saw that, I was forward deployed with a Marine Expeditionary Unit. I was the platoon sergeant for a force reconnaissance platoon. And so we knew then that, we were going to get back on the boats and we were going to be the first response to those attacks. So we made our way into Afghanistan in November. So we were among the first people in country. And, it was my first experience with combat. I kind of missed out on the Gulf War. I spent that in Buenos Aires, which wasn't horrible, but in Afghanistan, having a responsibility for a platoon of Marines, a platoon of very highly skilled Marines, it's everything that you've done in training, really becomes real. I think for anyone who has led, others, when the reality comes down that, we're now at the point that everything that I've hopefully trained them on, all the things that I've taught them they're going to follow through, they're going to stay safe and do their job well. And, I'm not going to have, I hope, on my conscience that I hadn't done more to prepare them, to train them. And that's, kind of a motto in the Marine Corps. You'll see it painted on a wall. Let no man's ghost say that you should have trained me harder, right? And I used to field angry phone calls from wives, who would say, why are you keeping my husband out late at night or on the weekend? And I'm like, well, because my fervent desires that I bring him back to you unscathed, with no more holes in him than he left with. So I was willing to do that as a leader, and it paid off. I think we got into one of the first gun battles in the War on Terror on December 7th, on a road between, coming out of Kandahar, when we attacked Taliban convoy and eliminated a significant portion of 70 or 80 folks in total between the people that we engaged and dropped bombs on. And that was in more ways than one. It was certainly a proud moment, that all my Marines had performed well. We'd done everything that we had trained to do and practiced and rehearsed, and that they were all safe. Certainly that we had accomplished the mission that we had been sent out for, and that we had, eliminated, some bad guys, that we had gotten a little payback. At that point, everybody was very eager to get retribution for the Twin Towers. But the lesson that I learned that, from that, or a lesson, one of many, that I learned, is that, combat or traumatic experiences impact a lot of people very, very differently. Most of I made it a point the following day to take time to get each one of my guys and just sit down in the sand, and talk to them a little bit, like, hey, how did that, what do you remember? How did you react? How did everything feel? One of the really fascinating kind of academically things that I learned from it was that the way that we react in really stressful situations, which is not specific to combat, obviously, but it we get tunnel vision. All you can kind of see is what's right in front of you. There's a thing called auditory exclusion that just does not allow you to hear anything that's unhelpful. There's factors called blood shunting that kind of pushes all of the blood out of your extremities and into your major organs to prepare you for fight or flight. So it wants to, oxygenate the big muscles, and that means that, some fine motor skill things that you might need to do, like, change the magazine in your rifle, or push the button on your radio. All those things can become very challenging, and those are things that nobody has taught, because nobody, not many people knew, because the time since we've, kind of engaged in those things in the military anyway, have been so long. There was, law enforcement has, certainly dealt with that, and there's some writing about it, some things I read, but it was really fascinating to kind of confirm the things that I knew. Time, slowed down to a point that, comically slow. I was, watching a Taliban fighter try to raise his rifle to shoot me, and like, just, it was, there's just all of these things that you're experiencing for the first time, and I think it leads to the potential, if you don't understand it, to kind of think you're there's something wrong, or you're having a out of the body experience, or you're going crazy. Um, and I did have one Marine out of the group that, his experience was far different than most. While most others, like, experienced slow motion time, he experienced very fast motion time. And he was somebody that had joined us later in training and hadn't had the full benefit of the year and a half together that we had. So it was fascinating to see that aspect of it, that, there's so much that goes on in the head and the heart and the body, and that they're all, uh, factors that have been built over, since we've started, we became human, to try to protect us, but, to protect us against animals, right, that might chase us down, but, not against a bullet. So we haven't quite, evolved to that point yet. So a lot of the things that were, intended to be beneficial, in combat, can be detrimental, particularly if you don't understand them. So that was, our introduction to Afghanistan, introduction to combat. And, it wasn't until years later that, going back and talking to some of these Marines, or have some of these Marines reach out to me, that, some people reacted very differently to the fact that, we had killed a bunch of people. That set, uh, I say poor, it that, impacted some of those Marines negatively, right? And I had them reach out, like, "Hey, do you still think about it? Do you still see their faces?" And for me, I didn't, in that particular instance. Um, Later, other times I would, and, so that's, I kind of learned that, there's so many, even among very highly trained and highly motivated, uh, people, you never really know. There's so many factors that go into how we're all impacted by events, and how we're impacted today, that we may be impacted completely differently tomorrow, or next week. Um, but there's a very good bet that, when you're exposing yourself to these, sorts of stressors, psychological, emotional stressors, time after time after time after time, eventually you are going to be impacted. And that's, I felt that I was, kind of impervious to all of that. I was like above all that. I had chipped away enough that, I was just a block of stone. And, so, kind of fast forward to when I retired in 2008, it was still, and I guess there's still certainly a stigma about, mental health. But, at the time, I think it was greater, much greater than it is now. And, as I was in the retirement process, the question was asked, "Hey, do you want to talk to anybody about anything mental?" And I'm like, "Nope, I'm good. No worries here." And it wasn't, for another 10 years before a conversation that I was having with a friend, and he was like, you know, you know, it doesn't necessarily, you know, having PTSD, or having some sort of reaction to things that happen, doesn't mean that you're violent, or you're, jumping at, anytime somebody drops something, or you're, sleeping on the floor, with your earmuffs on or whatever. He's like, it's just, are you the same person that you were when you left? And, the answer is obviously going to be no. Well, and in many ways, I'm a better person. I think in many ways, combat is wildly beneficial. I mean, some of my best times that I had were, uh, in, busting into a house in the middle of the night, behind an explosion and grabbing, a guy who's building bombs. That's and massively rewarding. It's, allowing you to live, right on the edge, pumped full of adrenaline. It's a lot of fun, and it gives you a very much a kind of a god complex in a lot of ways. Um, but what he said that when he said that, he's like, that really kind of hit me that, I'm absolutely not the same person. And like I said, a lot of it's good, but there was some that isn't. And so it was not many 4 or 5 years ago that I said, hey, maybe I should go talk to somebody, kind of kind of see. And came to the realization that there's yeah, I realize there's the Eagles song Desperado. Everybody on here, I think, is old enough to know that. That's the part I used to always listen to that song over and over. And it finally dawned on me that it was the part that said you're losing all your highs and lows. Ain't it funny how the feeling goes away? And that's really kind of what hit me that things that just I had trained myself to be completely even. Even keeled, when I'm being shot at, even keeled when somebody's yelling at me, when you come into seeing a child, with that's been, taken apart by an IED, it doesn't matter. We don't have time for that. And it clicked finally. I'm like, that's the part of that song that, and I later read that it's, a lot of, people who have drug addictions and things like that really resonate, that song resonates with them because of that line. So it was, I thought that was neat. But, at any rate, when we went to Afghanistan, back to the history side, the Secretary of Defense, who was Rumsfeld at the time, decided that the war on terror was going to require more special operations people. And again, the Marine Corps was offered the opportunity, and the Marine Corps again said, "No, we're okay. We don't want to participate." This time, though, he said, "No, you're going to." And I'm not stuttering. So the Marine Corps was required to produce a test bed unit to see if we could counter operate with other special operation personnel. And it was small. There was of the actual people that we call shooters, there was 30 of us, and I was fortunate to be selected to be one of the team leaders. Um, and later we would, with our intelligence folks and supply folks, communications folks, everybody, we wound up being about 100 total. And we were called Marine Corps Special Operations Command Attachment 1, which is a big long name, but we just called ourselves Det 1. So in 2003, we were activated, and it was an incredibly unique opportunity. I mean, from the ranks of the Marine Corps, which at the time, generally we're somewhere at around 180,000 Marines. Um, Out of the reconnaissance Marines from which we were picked, there's several hundred, three, 400. And of those, 30 of us were selected to be a part of this group. So one, that gives you a giant God complex as well. Um, but it was an amazing time, an amazing opportunity. And it was really at that time when we were selected, we're anticipating all of the U.S. Special Operations Command money to come flowing in and to have all sorts of cool equipment. And that came, but it didn't come for about the first 4 or 5 months. And for the first 4 or 5 months, the man who was our leadership, and one of them, my boss, it's my book is almost, I wouldn't say it to him, but almost a love letter to him. I mean, because he was just the epitome of a Marine Corps leader, that well, we worshipped, almost. And the his the and the title comes from him. When he pulled me into his office, he said, I will let you pick whatever Marines that you want to be on your team, but the only stipulation is that they be tough, rugged bastards with strong backs and hard feet. And that had resonated with me. It never, I always like, if I write a book, it's going to be called Tough, Rugged Bastards. And it took me nearly 20 years after the fact to get started, but that stuck with me. But the thing that we could do, and one of the things that I still think is the best developer of mental toughness and physical toughness, is put weight on our back and go for a ruck or go for a march. Um, so in coastal Carolina, we would hike up through the mountains of Camp Pendleton for 20 miles every Thursday, whether we wanted to or not. And each, as we progressed, that builds a huge amount of camaraderie. Um, it builds a massive level of fitness. We had at the beginning, even for guys who were relatively fit, 20 miles is pretty good ways. Um, so there were guys falling back, there were people having trouble, but by the month two, month three, we were almost running it, and they would find other ways to, we would get to the beach for the last 4 or 5 miles back in the soft sand, and there would be a tire from a 10-ton truck that we would have to, each team would have to roll down the beach for a couple of miles. Those sorts of things just build a level of camaraderie within the team, but also a level of individual responsibility, feeling of responsibility, because you can't be the person to let the team down. And then at, a level of mental toughness that you know, ensures that you're always going to be able to accomplish the mission, whatever that mission may be. There's a guy, I'm a big quote guy, right? And there's one of the Greek uh, writers, Thucydides, said that, what did he say? Their drills or their drills were bloodless battles, and their battles were bloody drills. All right. So, if everything you do in training, and it's more, the Marine Corps more succinctly says, the more you sweat in peace, the less you bleed in war. All right. But the goal, and then our colonel's goal, and, it became my goal, is to make sure that when we go into combat, we're never doing something for the first time. All right. And make sure that it's never the hardest thing that we've ever done. All right. We might be, getting shot at, we might be, things blowing up around us, but you know what? I've been awake for 4 days before. I've gone for days without eating before. I've been, so exhausted that I couldn't move, and I got up and moved before. So, this is nothing, compared to that, other than the people shooting at me. So that was really the goal of our training, and why I think we went to Iraq for that deployment, and, had, a lot of really unique opportunities. It's one, there was, after we had been there for a couple of months, one story I tell in the book, and I'll tell it here only because it kind of ties a little to the mental health aspects. There was an American contractor who was working in Iraq. And he was, shortly after I was there, when the Abu Ghraib prison scandal came out. I'm sure you probably remember the photos and of naked Iraqis with bags on their heads and electrical wires, tied to them. Not good stuff, right? And I think one of the things that we saw from that, or the whole world saw, if they remember it or not, the Army unit was patrolling shortly after those videos came out, and they stopped because they saw a bundle in the middle of the road, and it expected it to be an IED, so they dismounted. They went forward to look at it and realized that it was a body, but a body without a head, and it was an American contractor who was working in Iraq who had been beheaded, and was dressed in an orange jumpsuit, much like the jumpsuit that we dressed the prisoners in Abu Ghraib. And later, the video came out, and it was a fellow named Al Zakarway, who was pretty high up on the most wanted list. Who was, or at least, it was expected to be him, or they thought it was him. Sawing this guy's head off with a Bowie knife, essentially. Not something you want to see. But while we were there, we got a information on some of the people involved in that attack. So we went, raided a house in the middle of the night. I pull out, we do what's, called our site exploitation. We go through, there was only one man in the building. He was asleep. So that was one of the benefits of blowing off somebody's door at 2 a.m. There's not a lot of time to react. So because of that, we rarely shot anybody. We can normally get in and get them and hopefully get information from them. But we grab him, we take him out. I find a big Ziploc bag with a incredibly bloody orange jumpsuit and copies of this CD, multiple copies. This guy was reproducing these copies of the CD of sawing this fella's head off. So that, uh, having, certainly not being blameless, right? Certainly being a guy that's killed, quite a few people. Um, that level of violence and hate, was at once absolutely repugnant, right? But also a little fascinating. So like, how could somebody do that? So I asked to help in the interrogation of this guy. And normally we would have soldiers that would just basically stand as a guard in there to make sure that they didn't try to escape or try to kill themselves. So they said, I don't know why you would want to do this, but yeah. So I got to, stand there and be the guy in his during his interrogation, his initial interrogation. And the goal of that initial interrogation is to kind of come in with shock. And, while they're still disoriented from being captured, they don't quite know what's going on. We want to, try to get information from them. And we never, obviously, I wouldn't tell you if, we treated the prisoners the way that we were supposed to treat them. We asked them questions. They weren't, tortured or anything like that. And among U.S. Special Operations Command, that was, the orders from the top, right? Follow the letter of the law on what's permissible and what's not permissible. But this fella gets brought in with his interpreter, and our interrogator comes in, and I went to stand kind of at the chair behind him so that he could feel my presence there. They start asking questions, and he's like, "Yeah, I don't know anything. I don't know anything." And the interrogator puts the laptop with the video CD in, and it's, as soon as he opens the screen, it shows up. There's a concrete or cinder block wall with a bunch of guys standing in black, and this guy on his knees in an orange jumpsuit, and the man sitting there just, he's trying to hide his eyes. He doesn't want to see it. I don't know which one of the people in the image he was, but it was absolutely clear that he knew what it was. He knew what we were seeing, and he knew what was happening. And at that point, I really, more than anything, almost more than anything, I really wanted just to choke the life out of him. And I thought at this point I could absolutely, take this guy's life, and I wanted, and not that I could do it. I really wanted to do it. I wanted to make him hurt. I wanted to make him pay for what he had done. I wanted to understand what it felt like to feel somebody like choking and gagging, until to the point that they're gone. And that, as that realization sank in, it, scared the crap out of me, and I realized at that point that, we're all, I think we're all, under the right circumstances, we're all capable of great acts of violence. So, it's really hugely incumbent upon us to be very, very clear on what it is that we're fighting for, what it is that we believe in, what it is that we're, our worldview, what we're all about. And I think that's something you could, normally it hits the news when Marines or soldiers or sailors, lose that compass, like their North Arrow or the North Star. The Navy SEALs, it was a big, controversy there. Marines, urinating on dead Iraqis. When those sorts of things happen, it is often attributable to a lot of things. You can't paint anything with a specific brush, but sending our folks into combat over and over and over again for 20 years begins to erode, your moral fiber. There's the idea of moral injury that people see too much over too long of a period of time. It may not hurt you now, but it eventually, the chickens will come home to roost. And that was, probably the experience for me that both made me value the things that I believe in more than anything, because it was, if not for that, I may have at least attempted to act on that just overwhelming desire to choke the living shit out of this guy until and watch, feel the life like ebb out of him. That was kind of an eye opener for me, that one, we're all capable of things we don't think that we're capable of, but it's making sure that we're really, really clear on the things that we do believe in, the things that we think are important. Like I said, what we, our values are our North Star, so that we stay on the right path. I don't, if we hit a point where anybody wants to ask questions, or you have anything you'd like to talk about. If not, if you do, throw your hand up or say something. Otherwise, I ultimately that deployment was very successful. When we returned, the again, Secretary of Defense Rumsfeld said, "Hey, we're going to take this 100-man organization and turn it into a 3,000-person organization," and that was the forming of the Marine Special Operations Command. Paul.
I believe didn't do what you were so tempted to do, and I certainly understand why, is because you didn't want to become one of them. And that action would have turned you from somebody who you are to somebody that you didn't want to be, and that you were eliminating whatever's goings that behaved that way. And it's just an observation worth.
Yeah, thanks, Paul. I do think, one of at least a factor in, some of the challenges that younger service members, have had over the past 10, 12, maybe 20 years coming back, is that and maybe it's always been this way, but there's a lot of outcry, when the Marines got caught urinating on dead bodies. Why are we worried about this? What's the big deal? When one of the SEALs was accused of stabbing a prisoner who had already surrendered or been captured. Why are we, we'll never win until we fight like them. But that's the thing that people don't understand, is that we lose, when we start fighting like them. Because we've, all of us that have served in any capacity, we take an oath, right, to support, defend the Constitution of the United States and the set of ideas that our country was founded on. And when we act outside of that, then we're absolutely setting or when we allow people to act outside of that, we're essentially saying, here, have some moral injury that's going to come back at some point, and it's going to manifest itself in some way, and it's not going to be helpful. Right. So I think in some ways there's been a little like military hero worship from the general population. And in some ways it's fantastic. In some ways, I think it's a little detrimental, because we're willing to, and I say we as the American people, to overlook wrongdoings and say, hey, that's, boys being boys, whether it's, sexual assault or whether, it's whatever it is, it can't be condoned, especially from the military, the people that we're entrusting with the power and authority to protect us. And the same with law enforcement. When and I've never been in law enforcement, but when a cop goes bad, then you're kind of poisoning the whole. You're ruining it for everybody, and you're making it hard for the the people that, you know, you're supposed to protect and serve to trust that you will in fact do that. So it's, you know, thinking this way is obviously a byproduct of going through a lot of, you know, some not as traumatic as that, but through a lot of, you know, experiences over time. You know, I certainly would have thought differently 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, you know, when I joined the Marine Corps. But growing up kind of does that for you, and having the opportunity to lead, you know, to lead incredible men and women and sit and talk with them and hear their, you know, their concerns, the things on their mind, um, you know, gives you a lot of perspective, I think. So I'm absolutely grateful for that.
Uh, you know, John, I have to top in. I really appreciate you normalizing a lot of things that you just talked about. It was fascinating to me to hear the history because there's a lot I didn't know. It was really good to hear you just share so vulnerably because you really normalize some of these things. And that's the hardest part when shame builds, when, right, we don't understand what's happening to us, you know, whether, you know, you're a protector or anybody who's been traumatized, like, you know, what is happening. And I just feel like you shared a lot to normalize very normal biological responses to something so abnormal. And I love what you just said. Like, I've never heard this angle with all the talks that we've had on. Somebody really come on and clearly articulate what holding on to that North Star
Mm.
is like and how we should think about that. Because I don't know, it just seemed more clear in the way that you shared the importance of why we have to hold on to that North Star and not become like some of the things that our enemies, like the, you know, the terrorists, the Taliban at that time, or Hamas now. I think it's, you know, that we are it, and I shouldn't say we, I did not sign on that line. So thank you very much. But just that is what makes our military different in the training, that we will not become that. That is not in the training. I don't know. I just appreciated hearing that, how clearly you've articulated so many things. But it sounded like you had more to share. So I just wanted to pop in with that.
Oh, no, thank you. Yeah, I think I've spent a lot of time thinking about that in particular. You know, part of I retired from the military in 2008 and kind of retired. So I 2 weeks later, I went straight back to the same job that I still have. So for the last 16 years, I've been the training and education branch director for the Marine Raiders, the Marine Special Operations School. And it's an amazing opportunity to work with incredible human beings every day. So it's you know, I walk around with a big smile on my face, pinching myself. But it also gives me the opportunity to sit and talk with a lot of transitioning service members, you know, a lot of people who were, uh, you know, some of them kind of get a little bit off course, you know, and want to sit in and talk about it. You know, it's been a good opportunity to recognize that I don't know that we'll ever do away with the stigma of mental health entirely, but I think we're making some pretty big gains in it. You know, one of the things that we talk a lot about with them is, you know, you hurt yourself lifting weights, you know, you go to the physical therapy, you know, and that's to be expected, right? We have great access, great physical therapists. And, you know, the reason that we do that is to get you back, you know, lifting heavy again. Um, and so why should any other therapy be different? It's, you know, if you put off going to physical therapy, you know, what ultimately happens is, you know, first it was my shoulder, you know, I try to you know, work around it, or I try to, you know, make some accommodations so that I can still work out. You know, next thing is going to be my back because, you know, of my shoulder. And, you know, these things compile and compound and gain interest, right? Like negative interest, and things get worse. So that part's it's really awesome. But I think in addition to that work, I've, you know, in writing, I've started having the opportunity to serve as a coach, both for the Honor Foundation that Sarah and I talked about, but for uh, I call it a performance coach, and it's certainly different than the example I use, a therapist, or, you know, I'm certainly not qualified to do that. But you know, I think therapy is in a lot of ways like looking through the rearview mirror, you know, kind of seeing things that have happened and how we can can process them. Whereas coaching is, looking through the windshield and saying, hey, what's the future that I want to see and how do I get there? And so I use a lot of analogies, military related, because that's really all I know. But, the thought of being in the company I started is called Walking Point. And it's really, you got to be on your own point man or point woman on patrol, and you got to know, where you're going. And along that route, inevitably, you're going to, you're going to have to make detours, on things. But, the goal is that, when we do, we recognize it and we quickly get back onto the route. And that route is really, a line between the things that we believe in, the worldview that we have, our values, and who we want to become, right? So who we were raised to be, and then, who we want to become. So that's, all of my analogies are obviously military related, but kind of revolve around that idea. And the North Star, I think, is normally I'll use the Southern Cross instead of the North Star, only because it's the Marine Raiders and the Marines of we fought in Australia during World War II, or they fought in Australia, and underneath the symbol of the Southern Cross. But there you have it.
Well, thank you so much. What a fascinating talk. And again, I just want to thank you for signing on that line and protecting our country, and articulating so vulnerably your thought process. And I mean, it just helps other people. It helps other people with their own story and processing their own story. So I'm very grateful that you came on. So now we'll just open it up to questions and comments. And Rich, what's on your mind?
John, when you retired, did you have any a gap between the time you got out and the time you started something else?
I really wish I did. I did not. I encourage folks to take some sort of gap. I was, at the time that kind of things happened to me, we were the Marine Special Operations Command had just started, and we were getting ready to run our first training course. And so I felt this responsibility to, as soon as I left one day in uniform and came back on Monday in civilian clothes. So, I wish I had taken a little bit of time. And it's an interesting point. One of the things that and when I talk with Marines and sailors, whomever, about this, when you join the military specifically, it's an initiation, right? You go through a process of, and I can only really speak for Marine Corps boot camp, but I mean, you're taken from, a long-haired civilian that gets off of a bus in the middle of the night. They, take away all of your clothes, take away your hair. You learn a different language. The clock, different times. Everything changes. So you go through this absolute initiation to enter a new world and be a part of it. We don't do that when people get out. And in a lot of ancient warrior societies would do that. When people came back from combat, they would have some sort of like renormalization process where they welcome them back. And I believe that that's a reason that, we have a lot of people that have a lot of problems, because they have this identity that was built over the time that they're in. And it really doesn't matter if it was 4 years or 20 years, but they have this identity, they're a thing, and then suddenly they're not. The tribe that they had, that they fought with or lived with, now they're on their own, and they have difficulty. So I think that I encourage people. I'm a big believer in getting outdoors. And there was a couple of years ago, I was working to help, and they passed this Veterans Outdoor Rehabilitation Act. So if I encourage people, like, if you can, go hike the Appalachian Trail, take some months and do it. Or if you can't, go camping for a weekend, do something, whatever your means allow you to do. And I really, really wish that I would have. But I also, I had, when we talk about transition from the military, I tell people I never really transitioned, or at least I had a very narrow glide slope, because for the probably the first 4 or 5 years I worked as a government civvy, and I still kind of thought I was in. I still acted like it. And so I've been able to kind of decompress that way. But I've definitely told my wife when I leave this job, I'm going to go do something cool. So I don't know if I went off on a tangent,
No,
Rich.
no, the reason I asked that is because when I retired, I didn't do anything for a while. And that's when the impact of the trauma started to hit me. I had
Mm.
time on my hands to think about it.
Yeah, I definitely think, and that's buddy of mine who's a ranger, retired 20 some year ranger with a lot of combat deployments, retired and went, on this ayahuasca trip in South America. And, it was like, hey, man, that was, not obviously, man, probably not legal in the US. And it was, a wild, experience, but he was like, it was horrible, but it was wildly freeing. I think there's, I don't know, whatever your thing is, I think there's opportunities, to, one, I think for, places like this, and other places to help people make the transition back to the normal world. So there's a guy, uh, forget his name, Campbell, Joseph Campbell, who wrote the Hero with a Thousand Faces and other, he talks a lot about this idea of a hero's journey, and I could talk about it for hours. So I know I won't be able to do that, but the, when we leave, when we grow up, right, we're kind of, or join the military. Absolutely. We go from the ordinary world that we knew into this extraordinary world, or, that's just a different world, and we face challenges. And the whole idea of that is that we learn and we come out better. Um, but there's got to be a reintegration process, with that. And I think that's where a lot of times we fail. I mean, we teach, the service members that are getting out how to write a resume, how to, dress for a civilian job, how to, translate the things they did in the military into, resume bullets. But we don't do a good job of saying, hey, it's absolutely okay to not, you know, to kind of let your guard down, to, not feel the need to remilitarize yourself. And I think there's certainly people with good intent and ill intent that will be more than happy to try to create a tribe to bring, former service members, or I'm sure former, law enforcement, anybody, there's, you know, almost like the whatever crowd you can fit in school, you can, or the you hang out with the jocks, or if you can't hang out with anybody, somebody's gonna, there's gonna be some group that's gonna take you in, and they may not have your best interests at heart. So I think there's some exploitation of that, especially of veterans, going on. But there's also a lot of great organizations that, some I have the pleasure to work with, places like the Honor Foundation, Patrol Base Abate, that, that's their goal, is to provide a tribe for, veterans to come in. And we also just need to, reintegrate and hang out with civilians, right? We stop feeling that we have to be a little clique unto ourselves. Going to the one opportunity that I had that really changed a lot of things for me. I was, and probably one of the scariest times of my life. After I retired, I used the GI Bill to get a master's degree, and initially in liberal studies, and it was mostly literature. And most of that was online. But then I decided I still had some GI Bill left, and I wanted to get a Master of Fine Arts degree in writing. And I had to show up and sit in the classroom, and I had to sit in the classroom with, they ranged, as a master's program, so they were a little bit older, but, 25 to, 35-year-old, people that ran the gamut of college students, who were poetry majors and things like that. And I'm a 42, 43-year-old, combat veteran. And I was so scared to, that I would say something stupid, or that they would hate me, or, my writing would suck and they would like all laugh at me. So, but it wound up being probably the best thing that could have happened to me. It taught me to be far more tolerant, to recognize that, just groups of people that I had not spent any time around, from, the whatever, there were some of them in college, and having the opportunity to listen to them, just sit down and talk to them, get a cup of coffee with them, uh, was the best part of the education, in my book.
I have to say that, I mean, as a civilian, and I have parents that went to Juilliard, so they were musicians, no connection to veterans and first responders. It was a veterans story that absolutely opened my eyes, like, you and I had talked about before, John. So isn't it amazing what can happen when we share our stories? We just find those common connections and we build more understanding. And I love that story. That's really cool. Thanks, John.
Absolutely.
Scott.
Paul, did you?
Oh, there he is.
I was trying to, trying to unmute my mic here. Hey, first off, John, well done, brother. Thank you for your service.
No, thanks.
This was definitely time well spent. I guess starting with the last first, the whole thing about transition, everyone's transition is unique, right? We all transition at some point, but it's very personal. And some folks get opportunities, others don't. That's kind of how life works. But I think you really hit it right on the head, and sometimes you learn through your own transition too, right? The things that you did right, the things you wish you would have done, all that good stuff. And your advice is spot on. Taking that time, I think, is essential. Now, there's a sweet spot with everything, right? So, how much time do you take? All of that. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. But I absolutely agree. That's, kind of a fundamental thing to help you kind of balance. And when you look at who you become, you are an absolutely different person. And you made that comment too, whether it's 4 years or 20, no one comes in and leaves the same person, partly because of time, but certainly because of the experiences that you go through, good and bad. And so when we do get marched out to the front gate and everyone does that about face and starts heading back to mission, you're kind of out there alone and unafraid, but you're looking around. It's like, hey, this is a different environment. And hopefully, you're good with your land nav package and you understand a little bit of terrain appreciation, and that's going to, help to some degree. But so staying connected with people is so important. You're going to want to stay connected with all the guys and gals that you were with, but they're moving on. So the next best thing is, people like me, folks who serve that have an affinity for other veterans. That's where I always try to tell folks, look to connect with those people. They understand you, you're going to have a connection, but it is absolutely imperative to start, moving beyond your military identity, because it is gone in a day, whether you like it or not. Those boots come off, and like I use my boots now for taking care of my property out here where I live. And they're a heck of a lot dirtier than they were when I was Marine. At least I tried to, keep them squared away. Now no one really cares. So, but the point is, you do have to start understanding how to connect with other people, and the tolerance thing. It's funny who you think you are and how other people perceive you. You learn that that's something too on the outside. If you have kids, that become adults, they start to tell you things that weren't on your, on your scope in terms of what you thought you were doing, and maybe, how you were as a dad, and the stories that they tell you are like, oh, come on, I didn't do that, or I didn't say that.
Yeah.
But,
yes, you did.
Obviously, you did, and maybe you said it and you were thinking in a different terms than it was received. But all that to say is, we need to understand the importance of that integration back in to society, because it, you know, it helps here, but it also helps here. And those things have to be in sync. And
Yeah.
so, hey, great, great conversation today. And last thing I'll say is kind of going towards, you know, some of the earlier things you were saying is, yeah, that's a very real feeling, that feeling of wanting to reach out and, you know, inflict some serious pain because of the things that you see. And when you think about the young men, you know, over all these years, the very young men, and it's women now too, but the things that they see as young adults, that's tough, you know. And so when we're a little older and we see that, you know, at least we have maybe something that they don't have built into our kit,
Right.
that will help us with that. But it impacts everyone, you know, differently too. So thank God that we have good leaders that are there doing what they do as leaders. And for you doing what you're doing now, John, you know, you've stayed on in the position that you're in. And I know that you bring a wealth of knowledge and experience and love to these Marines, you know,
Yeah.
because we love our brothers and sisters. And thank you for what you're doing, because you're making an impact, and that's an important thing.
Awesome. Well,
God
thank you,
bless you.
Scott. And I do think the kind of to your point that you know, when we get out in the transition, you know, we've got to find a new identity. You know, being a Marine or a soldier, say whatever, you know, or a police officer, it's always going to be a part of who we were, a huge part. But you know, I used to think back when I was a kid, my parents would say all the time that, you know, your high school days are the best days of your life, you know, and I always thought, you know, that's kind of sad, you know, I'm not going to allow that to be true. Right. And by the same token, you know, my military time was awesome. I loved it. I had I had good times, bad times, but, you know, great times. But, you know, when I did transition, I'm like, you know, I'm going to find something else that's fulfilling. And I think that's one of the major contributors to issues that people have is they lose their sense of purpose and their sense of meaning. Right. And, you know, for a lot of us, and actually, interestingly, I was at an event a little while ago up at NY Fire Department training center in New York, and it was a lot of kind of first responders, and we were talking about leadership. And you know, one of the police officers there made a comment that, you know, when you see a person whose only two things in their life is their family and the job, you know, he's like, if they lose one of those things, they're going to lose the other, you know. And I that really like struck me. I'm like, you know, it's something, you know, this person now retires and they don't have the job. They become unbearable to the spouse, and the spouse leaves, or they lose, you know, for whatever reason, the spouse leaves them, you know, they can't. So that's a huge like kind of call to action to me to, you know, try to get people involved in other activities and hobbies and something else, and then find something that provides the, you know, value and meaning, you know, whether that's, you know, doing something like this, you know, writing or, you know, working with veterans or leading something in a veterans group, you know, whatever the case may be, just something that you're, you know, provides a sense of meaning and value, and lets you recraft your identity, basically.
Yes, that is so spot on. I know when I left, I had no hobbies. My hobbies were being a Marine. My profession was being
It's
a
kind of a
Marine.
full-time
Everything,
job.
yeah, you know, and in those 20 some years, they just clicked on by. And then again, you know, you're leaving, and all the things that I grew up hunting, fishing, you know, water sports, uh, was always very active. But all those things I didn't have time for. I didn't make
Yeah.
time for them. And anytime I did have, I tried to roll it into my kids, right? And
Yeah.
so there was no me time. And so getting out, you're looking around, it's like, well, who am I? You know, I think I know who I am, but what do I like? What do I enjoy? How do I relax? You know, those are things that maybe you haven't touched on in so long. And that's very detrimental. And so,
Yeah.
you know, finding that sense of purpose is it's it's a necessity, and sometimes it takes longer, but you have to find that, because if you don't,
Yeah.
then you're more apt to start to, spend down, and then, a whole host of things can happen. But for me, it was helping others,
Mm.
and moving in that direction, the volunteering and, connecting with helping people, that really brought a sense of purpose to me. And so, yeah, you were so right about that.
Oh, thanks. Are you familiar with the Backcountry Hunters and Anglers Armed Forces Initiative? You should check
No,
this.
I'm not.
Type in BHA if you like hunting and fishing. They have an Armed
Okay.
Forces Initiative that has a lot of opportunities. Tomorrow I'm going to go build turtle nests with them. And it's just a bunch of veterans to do something that it's good for turtles. Why not?
Yeah, cool. The
Did
Turtle
you
Club.
have did you have something, Paul? You're
We'll end with you, Paul.
oh.
We'll wrap that up. I love that, building a nest for turtles together.
Yeah.
Anything together, right? And that's a
Right.
wonderful thing.
I would like to disabuse you of the notion of being the oldest student in your class. I graduated from Cal State Fullerton as the last college that I've gone to in computer forensics and that kind of thing. And when I graduated, the guy who was in charge of the veterans programs for the entire Cal State system was there. And he got up and announced that I was the oldest graduate in the entire Cal State system.
Wow.
Yeah, well, that's kind of what I said too. And then I sat down.
Yeah, I think I found it was, once I came out of my shell a little bit, I found it was hugely rewarding. I think it was beneficial also for the younger students to have somebody that they could talk to and get a different perspective on things. So, yeah, I
Agreed.
try to make it a point to meet, people that I, really don't want to meet, or I'm a little leery or scared of meeting. And I usually find that it's well worth it.
Well, it's not so much a matter of being afraid as it is of having common ground to which you can use to develop a relationship.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
yeah, and I have to tell you, some of the young people in my class were a whole lot smarter than I was. And then somebody told me just become a company philosopher and get paid by the thought. So anyway, thank you very much for your presentation today. It was certainly eye-opening.
Oh, well, thank you.
I appreciate that so much. I think too, what a wonderful opportunity for those students specifically in that arena to have you there with your angle. To me, it was absolutely life-changing to hear this person's story that I told you about, the veteran, because I was so detached from the cost of war.
Mm.
And to me, that was what's the word? It just, when it finally was on my radar, I thought, this is horrible that civilians do not understand the cost of war. We need to be in there with you in some way. And what I'm thinking is, on the backside, maybe mostly like helping the transition process, having platforms like this to be able to really share your story so that you're teaching other people, you're connecting with other people, and the ones who have your similar experience can say, hey, yeah, you're not crazy. This is what's going on. So yeah, really appreciate that. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And I really enjoyed this. I've enjoyed getting the opportunity to chat with all of you. And I would be, I guess, remiss if I didn't say, there's kind of more of that, where that came from in my book that comes out in August, Tough, Rugged Bastard. It's on on Amazon and anywhere you buy books, you can check it out. And I would, if we ever run into each other, be more than happy to sign you a copy. And I hope that this will not be the last time I'm on here in some capacity, whether it's setting and listening. Now that I've kind of found this place, I've really enjoyed it. And thanks, Sarah, for having me, and thanks everybody else for listening.
Thank you so much. You are part of the family. You are welcome on any and all groups. And everything about John will be in the description on the YouTube channel, so you can connect. So again,
yeah, please, reach out if there's whatever. You find yourself in North Carolina, and want to grab a beer, a cup of coffee, something.
thanks so much, John.